Previously on Cranes, etc. TV.
Previously, the NZG model of the Liebherr HS8130 crane was reviewed in its base configuration. In this review, we're looking at an accessory set for the HS8130 duty cycle crawler crane. The picture on the box shows what's inside, and it's the LSC 8-18 slurry wall cutter complete with equipment for the crawler crane. On the end of the box we can see that it's made by NZG and it's model number 10461. Straight onto the weighbridge and it's nearly £3, and that's about 1.35 kilograms. Okay, let's open the box and see what's inside. No surprises to see a pair of expanded polystyrene trays, and they are marked bottom and top. Also in the box is some assembly instructions, and we'll take a look at those in a moment. Once again, it's another job for the sharp knife, and after we've carefully cut the tape, we can lift off the top lid. And then we can see there are a number of parts in this accessory kit. The instructions provided are fairly simple, and they cover how to fit the equipment to the crane, and they are a little bit simplistic about replacing the jib head. It would help if there was a proper reeving diagram, and it doesn't cover every part that has to be fitted. We will start with the model configured as in the last video, and we will temporarily support the jib so the jib head can be replaced, and as you see here the pendant lines have already been disconnected. After undoing the nuts and bolts that hold on the original jib head, we can carefully remove it, making sure to keep the tension on the luffing ropes. Then we swap in the new jib head, and that connects in the same way as the old jib head. One set of existing pendants have to be swapped out for a short set, and with that in place we can remove the temporary support. Moving to the crane body, and we understand now why some of the handrails were removable on the original model, and in this case it's to fit the giant cuttings hose drum. You have to carefully manoeuvre it into position, and once it's there you can line up the connection holes. After that there are a couple of steel pins to insert to lock it into place. Next we can fit on the drum that has the energy chain, and there's another piece of handrail to remove. And after some more careful manoeuvring we can get it into position. This time it is locked into place with a very long pin. And as you can see there's no hope of doing this with salami sized fingers, or any sized fingers at all. Next we have a number of support brackets to fit to the jib, and these are used to support the hoses. The brackets fit into holes that have already been provided. There's also another drum to fit inside the jib, and this does require some manual dexterity to get it into position. Once it's there, it also clips into some pre-formed holes. With the drums fitted, we can now run the hoses to the jib head. We start with the cuttings hose, and it feeds through the big guide wheel at the top, and we then follow that up with the energy chain, and you need to feed through enough to stop it rolling back off the jib head. Next we run through a line from one of the winch drums, and we need to attach it to the slurry wall cutter. There's a little bit of reeving to do to make that attachment, and firstly the rope needs to be fed through a hole on one side. Then you need to run it under the pulley and through to the other side, and then it goes back up through another hole. And when you've achieved that, then the end of the rope goes up towards the jib head. At the jib head there's a special connection hanging down, and you need to feed it through the tying on hole, and then you need to tie a couple of knots in it and tidy it up to complete the connection. You can then wind in on the winch drum to lift up the slurry cutter. After that we'll proceed to connect up the hoses, and we'll start with the cuttings hose. It goes through a hole, but there's nothing to restrain it in position because it pulls out due to the weight of the hose on the other side of the jib. The solution to that is just to put a little spacer into the end of the hose and widen it out slightly. And if you choose the right sized piece, it still allows the hose to be pushed through the hole, but once it's in, it stays in. It's a similar story with the energy chain. You can push the end of it into the holder, but you might need to add a bit of packing to get it to stay in. Returning to the bottom of the jib, there are a couple more large frames to fit, and these are additional hose guides, one on each side. Earlier we fitted an additional drum inside the jib, and the rope for that should be taken off and up towards the jib head. There's no brake on this drum, so it unwinds too easily, and at the jib head you run it over the top and tie it onto the slurry wall cutter. One other part not mentioned in the instructions is the hydraulic return filter, and there's a special place to fit this at the bottom of the jib. As you can see, it clips into place, but it doesn't have any hydraulic lines running to it. So that completes the assembly of the model, so let's see how much it all weighs. And it's a hefty 4 pounds 12 ounces, which is nearly 2.2 kilograms. We start with the cutting's discharge hose, and it runs through some nicely modelled connectors. It's a reasonably soft hose which fits well on the huge drum, and the drum itself is detailed in rigid plastic. Positioned underneath the drum is the additional diesel tank. Looking between the drums you can see the drive motors, and the work platforms for both of the drums is mostly in metal. The drum for the energy chain is another detailed plastic part. The various guides clipped to the jib for the hoses are made of plastic, and the drum inside the jib is a simple part. In contrast, the jib head is much more complex. The lattice work is metal, and there's a metal guide plate. The large guide wheels for both sets of hoses are modelled in plastic. The pulley for the crowd rope is metal. At the top of the slurry wall cutter is the cutter turning device, and that's a metal part, and the yellow frame of the cutter is also metal. The many guide plates and steering plates are all modelled, and there's some nice meshwork in the upper part of the slurry wall cutter. Moving down, and there's more detail in terms of the cutting's discharge pump, and there are hoses to it, and this area has some complexity. The cutting wheels are also very nicely modelled with distinct cutting picks. To begin with, it's possible to use some of the parts as transport loads. The cutter is quite long because the turning device can't be removed, so you do need quite a long trailer. As an alternative load combination, you can put on the energy chain drum, and that combines well with the special jib head, and the casting has the proper legs for it to stand on. This combination doesn't require a long trailer, so you can close it up to a normal standard length. The other drum has the cutting's discharge hose, but pre-assembled it's too large to use as a load. However, there are a couple of screws, and if they were undone, maybe viable load sizes could be produced. In service, both of the drums can be rotated, but they're not free spinning, which is good, so that allows you to put a little bit of tension onto the hoses. The big guide wheels at the top of the special jib head can be rotated, so in theory you could lower the cutter head realistically. The real cutter has a turning device, and that allows it to have the correct orientation irrespective of where the crane is sitting. It's good that this also can be worked on the model, so you can change how the cutter head is positioned compared to the crane. The other working feature is the cutting wheels, and they spin very freely. This is a significant accessory set for the Liebherr HS8130 crane model. It converts it into a very impressive looking piece of foundation engineering equipment. The real machines are complex, and that is reflected in the model. Although a little pricey, this set is detailed and it has some nice functionality. Overall, the set adds to the base model and is excellent.